HTML5, what is it all about? Well, basically up to this point, we've been coding with HTML 4.01. So what's the big difference with HTML5? Well, a lot and not a lot at the same time. You don't have to learn a new language. You don't have to rethink everything I just showed you. You don't have to worry about scrapping everything you just learned and starting from scratch. In all honesty, HTML5 makes coding HTML easier. And the most important aspect of HTML5 is that it makes your HTML documents have more, you guessed it, meaning. It lets you make more semantic sense of your HTML documents. Why? Because HTML5 introduced a number of new HTML tags that just make more sense. So instead of using divs with the ID of header and footer, or spans with the class of sidebar and things like that, we can actually use new tags that make more sense, like header, footer, aside, article, section, time, things like that. There are a lot of new HTML tags that make your document have more semantic sense. So we're going to dive into some HTML tags, HTML5 tags rather, and I'll tell you a little bit about them and how you can properly use them so your document, your HTML, the meaning of your HTML5 document has been maximized and optimized. So let's start off with the file here. You want to create an HTML file and call it html5.html, add your basic structure, and give the title intro to HTML5. So first things first, the doc type up here is actually an HTML5 doc type, and we've been using that the whole time. And you don't have to worry about things rendering properly or whatever. It's still just HTML. The main thing that you should know is that HTML5 tags don't actually work for old browsers like Internet Explorer 6 and I think 7 and some other older browsers, but a lot of people aren't using those browsers now, and I certainly hope you aren't. But the thing is, there are some easy ways to make that work, and as we go throughout the course, I will show you how to make sure your HTML5 works on all browsers, regardless of how crappy or old they are. So first things first, let's talk about the header tag, the HTML5 header tag. So the header tag is simply used for when you want to have your content be in a header. It could be the literal header of your website, like Brad's website, or it can be the header of a blog post where you have the heading and then you have some text in the heading. But the header doesn't really need much more added to it. You don't really need to add IDs and classes because it has enough semantic meaning, just like that. Now, let's just, let's make this have a level 1 heading so it stands out in the HTML document in the browser there on the right side of the screen. So we have this. Let's add a tagline too. Why not? Let's say where you'll learn to code. There we go. So Brad's website. In the header, we have the title and tagline of the site. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is the footer tag, because it's quite related to the header. And where would you use the footer? Well, in the footer. It basically can be used at the footer of your website at the very bottom where you have things like your copyright information, something like that. Or you can use it if you were using a blog post and you wanted the foot of the blog post to have your byline or some links to your the rest of your site, things like that. And that the footer basically, again, the footer tag has enough meaning that the browser actually knows, hey, this is a footer. Whereas the browser didn't know before. When you used your div tag and you said footer, the browser has no idea what this is. It means nothing to the browser, and so it can't actually read that properly. It just sees it as a tag with some attribute and whatever. Whereas Google and search engines can actually recognize that you're using semantic HTML5. It knows, hey, this is a header. Hey, this is a footer. And it's good for you to be as semantic as possible when coding your site. So that's the header and footer. Let's talk about another tag, the nav tag. This one is basically stands for navigation. And on all websites, you have navigation. So this is useful because you can add some navigation to your site without having a div with the ID of navigation or a UL tag with the ID of navigation. You can have a nav tag, and you can use the nav for your global nav at the top of the site where you have your links like home, about, blog, contact, services, so on and so forth. Or you can use nav for if you're just within a page and you have a little mini navigation, like a sidebar navigation to subpages or navigation to different categories in your blog, things like that. That's how you'd use the nav tag. And again, it's semantic. The browser knows, hey, this is navigation. So that's good. And you do something like this. You can add an unordered list within there, and you can add, let's add some links in here. This would be a good, useful navigation. Let's say we're going to link to HTML forms. We're going to link to different parts on our site here. We're going to link to that HTML. I believe it is forms.html. Let's add another thing here. Let's go HTML headings. And this would be headings.html. Let's add another one here for fun. And let's make this one images, HTML images. And the URL or the href will be images.html. So there we go. We've got to navigation right here in the browser. You can see we got navigation. If you wanted to add an extra heading in here, you can add like a level 3 heading and say something like navigate this site. And this is still within the nav tag. So that is a navigation. Cool. There is another HTML5 tag called the section tag. And section is a little bit kind of funny and a little slightly meaningless like the div tag, but it has a leg up on the div tag because it has some meaning. It means section. And you can kind of use it anywhere. You can use it in replacement of a div tag if you want to have a little bit more meaning to your document. Which brings me to another tag that I want to introduce you to show you how you can use it in conjunction and pair it with the section tag. And that is the article tag. Article, you've seen this one a couple times in the past couple lectures. Article tag. You should be able to guess what this would be, and it would be an article, like a blog post would be a good example. So let's talk about a blog post. Let's just add a pretend blog post here. So let's add a level 3 heading here and say, learning to code from scratch will be the title. Let's have a span tag and say, by Brad Hussey. And then we could have a paragraph tag with some text. And I'm going to use some lorem ipsum just to fill it out a little bit. Let's say this is my blog post. And then I wanted to add another, let's say footer tag. Why not? Footer and say posted in, let's use a strong tag, coding. There we go. So there we go. We've got our article right here. And this looks like an article, looks pretty legitimate right here in the blog, in the website, Learning to Code from Scratch by Brad Hussey. We got the blog post here, posted in coding. So that's pretty semantic. But if you wanted to make it even more semantic, you can use section tags. So you could do things like this: article, section, and wrap the blog post heading here in a section tag, and then go ahead and give that section a class. Because why a class? Because we want to use this class multiple times. You have multiple articles. They're all probably going to have the same layout and style. So you want to make sure you're using classes here, because if you want to style these articles using the same styles, you need to use classes because they're global. Whereas if you used an ID, you can only use it once. So section, let's say article heading. So that would be a good use of a section. So now we have a section. You can see right over here, we have the article heading. And then now let's have another section. And let's give it, let's wrap it around this content here and tab that in and give it the class of article body. So now we have the article body. So if we had more paragraph tags, it would make even more sense here. So I'm going to add more lorem ipsum. So there we go. So now we still have, you can see 2 separate paragraph tags, but it's within the article body section. Makes a lot of sense. And then at the bottom, you can have another section, and you can give the bottom section the class of article footer. Now you might wonder like, hey Brad, but we already used the HTML5 footer tag. Isn't this kind of redundant? Well, yes, if you left it like this. However, what if you wanted more in here? What if you wanted a div with something like the class of further reading? And then in that div, you had, let's say, a level 4 heading. If you liked this article, you'll love. And then let's go ahead and add an unordered list. Or even better, why don't we add a nav tag? And then add an unordered list of just a couple other pretend articles. Why don't we just copy these list items up here just to save us some typing time, just so you can get the idea. I'll paste those in there. And there we go. So now we've got this is starting to come together, and it's incredibly semantic. It's beautifully semantic. And forgive me for my nerdiness here, but we're talking about like a beautifully organized HTML5 document. We've got a header. We've got a nav section. We've got an article with sections within it. The article heading, we have the article body section, we have the article footer section. We've got another footer tag in here, and we've got a nav tag. This is excellent. And then at the bottom here, we have a footer. This is incredibly semantic. Now, there is still a little bit more HTML5 I want to show you. There is also something called the aside tag. And now the aside tag works kind of like in 2 different ways. There's 2 good ways of using the aside tag, and that is as something within content. So let's say in our blog post here, we wanted to add an aside tag right here. Looks like this. And in the aside tag, you might want to use it in the way where you're kind of jumping out of the article a little bit to, it's kind of like a side thought. Think of like you're telling a story and then you're like, oh, hey, but let me tell you a little bit about that before I keep going, because it's going to give you more context and meaning as I keep going. So you could say like, this article is about learning to code from scratch. And then I tell you something like, quick story about how I made my first $500 in web design. And then you have a quick story here telling that story. It has something to do with the content here, but it's just a quick aside. I just got to jump out of this a little bit just to tell you something before we go back into the story. Or you can use it like a sidebar. So down here we'd have an aside. Whoops. That's an ASIDE tag. And then you'd have a sidebar where you'd have something like more about this site. And then you'd have some more text there where you can talk about the website. And now I know here it's not on the side, on the right or left side like a sidebar would be, but you would use CSS to style that. So this is kind of an aside in the sidebar sort of sense. That's how I like using the aside. And then one more tag I want to show you before I overwhelm you too much is the time tag. This is great. And I'm going to show you a very simple use of this. Time, instead of using a div tag or a span tag and saying posted on, well, let's go here after this footer tag. And instead of using a div tag and saying posted on March 3rd, 2015, you could use a time tag to wrap this entire thing, or more specifically, use the time tag to wrap literally the time. And time can wrap a date. It could do a timestamp. It could wrap like a calendar date, a time, a 24-hour clock, 12-hour clock, whatever you want. If it's time, it's related. It's semantic. So now this time makes sense. It's got semantic meaning, and it actually makes more sense. And if you wanted, you can add an attribute that has the date time attribute, and you could literally put, March 3rd, 2015. And now this even has more meaning. This literally can be read by a machine like a screen reader or Google, that this time is literally that. So those are your tags. You have your header, nav, articles section. You have the aside tag. You have the footer tag, time tag, and I believe that's it. We have the footer down here again. And so those are your HTML5 tags. Those are the major tags. There are a lot more. You could look it up. Just Google HTML5. W3schools.com will tell you a lot about the different HTML5 tags, but these are the main ones that you'll be using. So that was a lot, and thanks for hanging in with me there. Feel free to rewatch this video if you want to kind of hammer it in your head a little bit more. But that's your HTML5, and hang tight. See you in the next lecture.